Coming up on Capital Crossfire, issues with the recent New Hampshire primary, homelessness crisis in America, the Biden administration's increasing unpopularity, and United States air travel.
Joining us today for our discussion, Liz Stoddard, Jared Hoffman, and Vivien Williams, moderated by Sabrina Spadafora.
I'm Maris.
And I'm Maria.
From the GW TV studios in Washington, D.C.,
this is Capital Crossfire.
Our discussion covers President Biden's challenges, including his disapproval rating and questions about his handling of rising prices, homelessness, and foreign policy.
With homelessness rates sky high, the Biden administration must respond to the homelessness crisis. Additionally, our panelists will discuss the relocation of migrants by Texas Governor Greg Abbott and the public's reluctance to support Trump or Biden in the upcoming election, with a significant percentage citing age as a concern.
Our panelists will also discuss concerns about recent airplane malfunctions and questioning whether the federal government should increase intervention without disrupting the transportation network.
Lastly, our panelists will discuss concerns about the Department of Justice apprehension about JetBlue's acquisition of Spirit Airlines, and whether the government should or should not interfere with company decisions, formation of monopolies, and the potential effects on the United States economy.
Let's take it over to Sabrina and our panelists.
Welcome to today's episode. I'm Sabrina Spadafora, and today I'm joined by Liz Stoddard, a first-year majoring in political science. She's also a legislative assistant for the GW Student Association. Next to Liz is Jared Hoffman, a first-year majoring in political science and a member of GW Democrats. And lastly, we have Vivien Williams, a first-year majoring in journalism and mass communication and a member of GW TV's Capital Crossfire. We're going to start off our discussion today by talking about the recent elections. In New Hampshire, Biden's historic win signals hope for some in the upcoming election. However, members of the Democratic Party are losing faith in him as prices continue to rise, the homelessness epidemic soars, and disagreements regarding his response in Gaza. My first question to you all today is, should the Biden campaign be concerned about this in the general election, and how would you advise him to help address these issues?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think a good thing to sort of pinpoint is his successes. I mean, he wasn't even on the ballot in New Hampshire because the Democrats decided to start with a more diverse state like South Carolina, but still raked in 63% of those primary voters through a write-in campaign. I mean, if you want to see true excitement for a political candidate, a write-in campaign clearly shows that. I think I would advise him to sort of talk about his successes, whether that's the American Rescue Plan with $40 billion going to American workers, or the bipartisan infrastructure deal, which is $1 trillion going to the infrastructure of Americans. And I just think it's such a missed opportunity not to keep talking about these things, such as the Chips and Sciences Act. He got employment down to 3.5%. I think his approval rating is abysmal, and I think his handling of, foreign policy, especially Gaza, is in particular a blind spot for him. But I think if he really talks about his support for abortion, his support for American workers, his support for unions, I think he'll be able to gain that groundswell that we saw in New Hampshire across the United States.
Amazing. Yeah. What about you, Jared? What are you thinking?
I think I would agree with Liz that we have to highlight his many successes. He got the largest gun safety bill enacted in over 30 years, major investments in clean energy that we haven't seen before in America. And in regard to our economy is actively recovering. You saw the other day 3.3% growth rate. We have record low unemployment levels. So I think he needs to display to the American people that we are rebuilding, and he needs to highlight all of his successes.
Right. I mean, I think like both of them were saying, like one of his biggest successes has been bringing in new jobs. But I think one of the things that the American public is a bit disillusioned by Biden is he's trying so hard to appeal to sort of independents and people in the middle that he ends up not taking action a lot of the time. He's trying to thread the needle so carefully that he ends up doing nothing some of the time. So I think he just needs to be more decisive in what he wants to accomplish and how he wants to appear to the American public.
So based off our previous question, we're going to dive a little bit more deeper into the homelessness here in America. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development released earlier data this month. The homelessness in America has had a record level, more than 653,000 people each year, with Washington, D.C. up 12% homelessness rates and declared as having the most unhoused individuals per capita. Along with this new data, recent polls show that President Biden has a 58% disapproval rating. Because of this new disapproval rating, how would you all suggest that the Biden administration helps tackle this homelessness crisis here in the U.S.?
I feel like it's not as simple as we make it out to be. I mean, let's sort of look at that issue more complexly. I mean, let's look when urban planning was really popular in the 50s and 60s. But at that same time, we also saw highways being built through minority communities, sort of disenfranchising them away from the ability to say, I don't want that in my neighborhood, by just doing it for them anyway. We then go to the civil rights movement, where those minority communities are getting a seat at their table and deciding what my neighborhood is going to look like, where I want to live. But at that same reason, we also see white, wealthy neighborhoods within cities gaining much more power. So now we're left with the predicament of developers not wanting to deal with the hassle of building in those wealthy white neighborhoods because they don't want to have to deal with their HOA, they don't want to have to deal with their council, they don't want to have to deal with it. So where do they go? They go to communities that are less likely to stand up for it and are less wealthy. So there we see the targeting of minority communities again. So the problem of how do we solve this unhoused crisis, I think you can also look to two states, which is California and Montana. California's invested $757 million in affordable housing. And what they've done is essentially say to those white wealthy communities, either you find a way to house these people, places like San Francisco in particular, or we will allow developers to build whatever they want as long as 30% of that is affordable housing. Montana is doing the exact same thing, but the goal is not sort of housing equity. The goal is to protect their environment, what makes Montana great. The parks, the wilderness, all of that. The goals are different, but the strategies are exactly the same. But I think in this case, I would recommend that Joe Biden gets his hand off the wheel, because the minute that this issue becomes politicized, we see states deciding, I don't want to do that anymore because Joe Biden is a Democrat and we're Republicans and I don't want to do that anymore. But these little local solutions are actually seeming to be a lot more beneficial. I know that, trickle-down economics is not a term we like to use, but in housing, it actually tends to work, where if you build luxury units, those rich people will tend to move into them, freeing up housing all the way down the line. But that isn't really what we want to achieve. What we want to achieve is to have equitable housing, both in those minority communities and in those wealthier communities, because oftentimes people will say, I don't want people around here who will change my neighborhood. Whether they mean that for aesthetic reasons or whether they mean that in the racist sense, I think it's also important to understand that, just saying, oh, we'll build a homeless shelter, that's going to solve everything. That's really not what the achievement process should be. I think it should be starting at the bottom, starting at the core of the issue, and moving up. And so there are so many countless solutions, but I think looking to California and what they're doing of basically saying, locking these two groups in a room and saying, you figure it out, or we're going to build affordable housing anyway, is actually quite beneficial, and seeing that Montana's doing the exact same, I think is great. I think maybe some federal housing assistance might aid those two states in their process, but otherwise I think keeping it local, keeping it statewide has shown a lot more success than making it a more federal issue.
No, honestly, Liz, that's a really interesting insight. I want to hear Jerry's perspective. What are you thinking about this?
So I think homelessness is definitely a big issue in America, and I think one thing that Biden has done and should continue to put emphasis on is definitely rebuilding our infrastructure to make our neighborhoods better and more accessible for people regardless of their wealth. So I think he needs to make sure that much of his money is focused on undeveloped areas that need more development, and also I think he needs to put that focus on the jobs that he's creating and put in more job opportunities for people so everyone can build themselves up.
I really like something that Liz touched on, which is that this is not a Republican versus Democrat issue. These are people that need serious help. These are Americans that we are completely letting down. But I think there's a way we can look at it, like where there's a lot of indirect things we can do that would help. We need to be putting more resources into addiction recovery, into mental health resources, into and like we need to make these accessible. We need to make these in areas where they're needed. I mean, we all live in DC. We've been seeing like parks being closed and more homeless people just being more and more displaced and closer together, and it's just not something we can just keep putting off and keep being like it's not our problem, because it is our problem, and we owe it to everyone to address this as soon as possible.
So that's a very interesting perspectives on that very sensitive topic that's really prevalent here in the U.S. Moving along, we're doing similarly since 2022. Texas Governor Greg Abbott has been sending migrants from across the southern border to Democratic cities such as Chicago, New York, and right here in D.C. Tens of thousands of migrants have been sent with no food, no money, and very few possessions, leaving state and local governments to navigate the situation with little to no assistance at all. My question to you all is, how should the Biden administration and the federal government better assist state and local lawmakers and support migrants and local citizens that are deeply affected by this topic?
I think the biggest thing is not playing pawns or chess with them, essentially. I think, understandably, these governors who are shipping these migrants to these northeastern cities tend to be angry at the administration. I think a big thing that sort of needs to be understood is that our immigration system is fundamentally broken, right? Joe Biden has, in a sense, instituted the exact same policies as Trump, whether that is the Remain in Mexico policy that Trump took up, and then Biden's eerily similar. I mean, he used an app for you to apply for asylum, an app that if in the first 5 minutes, all the spots to meet a customs agent are gone. It even had issues reading the darker skin of some migrants coming across the border to the point where they had to install giant LED lights in order for those face scans on that app to work. Now I'm saying apps are great and can help a lot, but maybe something as sensitive as this doesn't need this sort of unnecessary barrier. Even though it's all about efficiency, it's not working. I think the biggest thing that we can do is expand startup visas, the creation of a startup visa, expand opportunities for students wanting to study here, and also expand the quotas. I know Mexico has the largest amount of people migrating to the United States, immigrating to the United States. However, that quota is too small for the amount of migrants coming over, right? Proportionally, the quota for other nations is quite higher, especially those in Europe. But are those people really coming over that much? No. Our crisis is at the southern border, right? But we don't need to use fear tactics. We don't need to use apps. What we do need to do is do a fundamental reprogramming of our system, whether that's immigration courts, which are understaffed, and we allow children to represent themselves, which is frankly ridiculous, or it's the fact that no one can get a meeting with a border and customs agent, or the fact that it's very impossible to traverse all of the paperwork that you have to do. What you need to do, centralize it, make it easy to understand, and make your policies clear. If Joe Biden wants the Remain in Mexico policy, just say it. Don't put it in so many words to cover up the shame that you're causing the rest of the people who voted for you and thought that you would end those policies. I think, frankly, if we don't look at this in a more holistic and compassionate way and don't try to make any very fundamental and foundational changes, we're going to end up right where we are today, which is having a crisis at the southern border and having Republican governors playing pawns with the immigrants coming over who all they want to do is get a better opportunity, shelter, and help their families.
Those are really interesting perspectives. I didn't know about Biden's app. I wouldn't assume that would work really well. I didn't know about that at all. But Jared, what are you thinking about this?
I think that a huge emphasis should, first of all, be put definitely on legal pathways into America. That's a reason why a lot of this is happening in the first place. We need to ensure that there are more easy, understandable, and accessible ways to legally enter the country. And also, I think we need to perhaps try and put emphasis on what kind of bipartisanship we can find. I know at the moment, I think the Senate is trying to work on some compromise bill to hopefully find some sort of bipartisan solution or something that can help this. So I think we should put emphasis on that and all the meanwhile ensure that border agents and border security is up to date in technology and isn't falling behind?
I think what we really need to do is hold Biden accountable. I mean, many Democrats, myself included, are very upset with him. He went back on several promises he had made. I believe he said, like, I will not build like another foot of the border wall, and he went back on that. He's, like I said earlier, he's doing a lot of these things to appeal to independents and moderate Republicans, and I think just the lack of trust that a lot of Democrats currently feel for Biden is going to maybe really hurt him down the line.
While it looks more and more that the 2024 election will be a repeat of 2020, polls have found that most Americans don't want either Trump or Biden to run. 70% of those Americans say that they don't want Biden to run again, and half of them are citing that his age is the main reason. 60% of Americans, including a third of Republicans, don't want Trump to run either. What do these polls reflect about the American public? And what are the ways that politics are now perceived nowadays? I want to start with you, Liz.
I think it's just a case of more polarization. I think what's important to understand is that that's the predicament we're in. Dean Phillips is not going to win the Democratic nomination. Joe Biden won New Hampshire with a write-in campaign. He didn't even come close. Nikki Haley is not going to win the Republican nomination unless a bunch of dominoes fall at the same time that aids her in her process, which means he would have to be convicted, Donald Trump. In addition, she would actually have to start winning some states before Super Tuesday. She didn't win New Hampshire, and her strategy there was to, depend on Democrats and independents to vote for her. You're running in the Republican primary. Your goal should not be everybody but the Republican voters, right? I think fundamentally she's missing out on the opportunity to win Republican voters. I agree that if she went against Biden, I would be very concerned for Biden's chances. She's not going to make it out of the primary. I highly doubt it. I mean, before Super Tuesday, she's got to get through at least 6 states. And what are those states? Nevada, Idaho, Missouri. She's not even coming close. Even in her home state of South Carolina, she's at 23%, and Donald Trump's at 63%. I mean, this is the predicament we're in now. And I think this is a situation where I have to say, I'm displeased with it, but Americans are going to have to bite the bullet in the voting box and choose what they want. And listen, I am fairly disappointed with how Joe Biden has done so far. I think he could have done a lot more. I think he could have strived for better policies. But I also think at the same time, I do doubt that Donald Trump will do anything to protect my freedom to choose and have autonomy over my own body, right? He put those Supreme Court justices, Gorsuch, Amy Coney Barrett, Brett Kavanaugh, all were fundamental in overturning Roe v. Wade. So I understand why Americans are displeased with this. The situation is not great. However, I think even though I don't want to say you have to vote this way, but I am going to say there are rights on the line. Your constitutional rights are on the line. I mean, we're talking about a man who tried to overturn the 2020 election because he lost. We're talking about a sore loser, essentially. I just don't think that person belongs in the Oval Office ever again. And even though Joe Biden is prehistoric, I do think that maybe we wait and see what the Democratic Party has to offer in 2028, which is sad to say, but it is the current predicament we're in now, and I think something that we have to be realistic about.
Yeah, what are you thinking?
I think people in general are kind of tired of the same old, you know, we dealt with Biden and Trump already 4 years ago. A lot of them don't really want to see it again, but it seems like that is where we're going to be. So I think we need to focus on the accomplishments the two have made and what they're hoping with in the future and their general views on democracy. Like Liz said, Trump tried overturning the 2020 election, even though everyone, including people in his own government, told him that the election, he just simply lost it. But even to this day, he's still falsely claiming that there was fraud and whatnot. But I think we need to focus perhaps not on the accomplishments the two have made. Biden, he's rebuilding our economy, and all these bills no one thought would pass have some of them passed, and I think we need to look at this through a policy perspective. These may not be the candidates that everyone has wanted, but it's the candidates we're getting, and I think we need to just compare the two and clearly see that one of them has a better record than the other.
Well, I love the idea of looking at a more positive side. I think there's a little negativity regarding this election, so I think that would be a great new perspective for everyone to take. Vivien, you want to finish this off?
I mean, yeah, like America, we can see from the polls from just pretty much everyone. America wants a change. America wants new ideas, young people. America wants not just old, white, powerful men. And unfortunately, like you two have said, this is sort of where we're at right now. But I mean, looking in the future, I think we can see there's hope. You know, there's new people coming in that could do a better job than both of these people running. And I think as Americans, we need to get away from this culture of like, well, they're incumbents. Like, we need to, it's an 8-year or 4-year term for a reason, right? Just because you were president for 4 years doesn't mean you should automatically be front runner again. And I think that we sort of need to get away from that as a culture. But age is a main concern. I think that Trump and who he picks as his VP is going to make a big difference. I think that people are looking to Kamala. I think that she's going to be a lot more pivotal than people think. She's on the younger side, politically speaking, and a lot of people are skeptical of Biden keeping her on the ticket, but he has fully embraced her, and I think she's going to be a lot more important in this election than people realize.
All right, we're going to finish off this discussion with a very current events regarding air travel. On June 5th, a door plug fell off of a Boeing 737 while still in flight, which was a cause of being improperly installed. More recently, on the 20th of this month, a nose wheel came off of a Boeing 757 while on the tarmac at Atlanta. These are only a few of the airplane malfunctions that happened just this month. My question for you all is, should the federal government intervene more than they currently are to protect the safety of the citizens? And how do they do this without disrupting the U.S. transportation network?
I think they should be way more involved. I mean, I'm happy to see that the JetBlue Spirit airline was blocked, because I don't think we need to go back to the Gilded Age where we were ruled by Rockefellers and Vanderbilts and Carnegies. But I think in that case, they made sure that JetBlue was not going to take more than 10.2% of the market, which I think was great. And I think that Judge Young made a great decision in that case. I think currently, at least what I've seen, air travel has been a nightmare, both with me trying to go to spring break, for example, or kids or people trying to get home, go see their family, go see their kids. Like, even people on this campus have had nightmare scenarios where they're stuck in an airport for 24 hours because all they want to do is go see their family in New York, and they can't do that, right? I think what's really important to acknowledge is that I do enjoy what the federal government's policy change has been on air travel, which Pete Buttigieg saying that if you cancel a flight last minute or kick somebody off, you need to give them a voucher for food, you need to give them somewhere to stay, you need to give them another flight, you can't just leave them. I think those are great policies. I think he's instituted them well after the Southwest fiasco a number of years ago. But I think in this case, what we're actually seeing is a lack of competition and quality control. With airlines like American and United taking a bulk of the market share, we're stifling innovation and we're stifling competition. I think a really big and important aspect is that these planes are safe. If you're going to put me in a giant metal tube in the sky, I want to make sure I'm not going to die when I'm in it, right? The doors should probably be on. The wheel should probably be on the plane. I feel ridiculous asking for these things of like, I would love 2 wings and I would also love 2 workable engines, right?
I agree. I think definitely we shouldn't be on flights when the flight is now falling apart on us.
Yes.
But Jared, what are your perspectives on this?
I would agree with a lot of what Liz said. I think we need some federal investigations into what happened with these specific Boeing incidents, the door and that and whatnot. I think Buttigieg has indeed proposed great rules to ensure that airlines, when they cancel flights, aren't just leaving people out in the dust. Airline traveling is definitely a problem for many Americans. I think that we need to, maybe make sure and rebuilding infrastructure could perhaps help this. I'm not sure, but I agree with a lot of what Liz said, and I think that we just need some investigations and find out exactly why what happened.
Right. I mean, like, just the sheer number of events that have happened so recently, I think, is very scary to a lot of Americans. And, a lot of people are asking, like, is this going to keep happening? Is this going to keep getting worse? And I think that we do need to be more involved. We need to have those investigations and those conversations so this doesn't keep happening, because I think if we don't, the impact's going to be very long-lasting of people possibly boycotting air travel, holding airlines responsible. But I think that the government definitely made the right call in blocking up that monopoly, and I'm hoping that airline tickets can stay affordable so Americans can get where they need to go.
We're changing gears just a bit. The U.S. Department of Justice raised concerns about the impact that JetBlue's $3.8 billion acquisition of Spirit Airlines would have on consumers and on the economy. Additionally, it was blocked by Massachusetts District Court Judge Young. On a similar note, Ticketmaster continues to act as an ongoing monopoly, holding all tickets for concerts, sporting events, and other public events. So you've all kind of touched base on this already. So do you guys think that there should be a standard for when the government can or cannot intervene with monopolies?
I think the legislation needs to be enacted tenfold. I mean, we have the Clayton Act, which I think is great, which was aiding in the process of blocking JetBlue's acquisition of Spirit. But at the same time, it's not that often that the Clayton Act or any of these antitrust laws are actually invoked in these processes. I think what's really important to acknowledge is that these antitrust laws were made in the early 1900s, the late 1800s, because of the monopolies in crude oil, in railways, in steel. I mean, as I said, the Rockefellers, Vanderbilts, and Carnegies of the world can't have that anymore, right? And so when I look at the current state of business in the United States, I do see monopolies everywhere, whether that is places like Google or Facebook or the acquisition in the airline industries. I think what's really important to acknowledge is the fact that these antitrust laws protect consumers, because Spirit is a cheap, low-cost place to go when you need a flight. We don't know if JetBlue's acquisition of that is going to change that model and take one of the two cheap airlines out of the market, that being Spirit and Frontier. I think what's really important is to look at the situation and say, one, we need to be using and invoking these antitrust laws more often. And two, I think we need more modern ones, because yes, they work, but at the same time, they're not for every company. I mean, with the evolution of tech, we need to update those laws, amend them, or create new ones entirely. I think that the state of monopolies in the United States is getting back to that age where we saw, again, JP Morgan holding the market with, between his hands. I think we can't have that anymore.
Jared?
I agree with a lot of what Liz said. I do think there needs to be the government needs to put emphasis on the ability to, invoke these antitrust laws. And of course, we remember this whole Ticketmaster thing from Taylor Swift's concert tour. And I think it's definitely important to hold Ticketmaster accountable when we can, and stop things like, scalpers and trading bots that get to them first and, sell them for double, triple, or whatever the price. And because especially when you got to go Ticketmaster for it, when all the tickets are kind of taken in a minute, then it's like, well, it's kind of puts you in a tough situation. I think that I do believe in capitalism. I think a lot of times we need to let markets play out, but at a certain point when, there's an abuse of markets, as we have seen in cases such as Ticketmaster and unfair mergers, I think that's when the federal government needs to step in.
Vivien?
Yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned Ticketmaster. I think that's an example a lot of people point to of this sort of government selective intervention. They intervene in an almost identical scenario, but not another. And I think with bringing in Ticketmaster again, yes, it's money for concerts, but it's still money moving around, a lot of money that Ticketmaster people spend through it, and it should be treated like an important issue along with air travel, of course. But I think that the government needs to start treating monopolies more equally and seeing them for what they are, an abuse of power. And I think that we just need to put more resources into it and put more people into keeping like their eyes on monopolies and stopping them before they grow out of control, like we've been seeing.
No, those are very, very important topics to talk about. I was wrapping up. My last question for you guys is, with the current state of the world right now, what are you hoping to see from Biden in these last couple of months he's in office? What are you guys hoping he'll achieve in such a short amount of time, or do you think, he's kind of at the end of it now?
Well, I think now that we're in sort of the campaign stretch, we're going to see a little bit less governing, and that's expected given the political system we have. But on that front, on the campaign front, I'll acknowledge first is that I want to see rallies, I want to see events, I want to see back-to-back things. I want to see him going to all the 50 states. I want to see him not just in the primary states that are important to him and not just the swing states, but I want to see him be active and engaged. When he went to strike with the automotive workers, I was actually very happy to see that. I was actually very proud to see that he would go and strike on the picket line with the automotive workers. I want to see that energy again. I also want to see, I would say, a rebrand of Kamala Harris, because often they've sort of neglected her as vice president and sort of left her to the wayside. But I think she's becoming too important to their sort of, I guess, inner workings, that she needs a rebrand. I don't know what that is, whether that's sending her on more events or giving us more like Mamala content. But anything. I mean, one of the best things I saw was her talking about what the best Thanksgiving turkey was. I mean, humanize these people. Don't just throw her to the wayside, but humanize them. I mean, Joe Biden with ice cream. I'd love to see more of that. I'd love to see more optimism, more enthusiasm, because you're trying to fight the sleepy Joe Biden accusations. And if you're not active, if you're not engaged, if we don't see a lot of content of you, if you're not on our screens, then we won't get that image. When it comes to governing, I'd love to see a change in the foreign policy. When it comes to dealing with both Ukraine and Gaza, I think we need to be more aware of Russia's, I would say Russia's negative energy in the region, whether that is with Serbia and its sort of influence in their dealings with Kosovo, or whether that's Ukraine. I also think that being a little bit more critical of how Bibi Netanyahu has handled Gaza, I think is also more important, because it's Americans who are seeing that and pointing that out and being generally upset with him. So I would love to see some policy shifts in that, and I would also love to see some more regulation when it comes to antitrust laws. I think that's a great sticking point.
Oh, awesome. What about you, Jared?
Well, I agree that during the campaign season there isn't typically a lot of legislation, but then again, this Congress has been historically, unproductive, the most unproductive we've seen in our lifetimes, and there are a lot of issues such as immigration that I believe Republicans are going to make a big talking point come this November, and I think it would definitely. So I think if we were to get legislation, that would definitely be helpful. So I want to, at the very least, I think, paint a picture that Democrats are trying to pass some immigration deal of some sort, and either it gets passed or maybe it doesn't, but make it clear that Biden wants to do something before this November. Let's see. Also, I do agree that we should be, doing our best to make it clear that this is to try and fight against the Sleepy Joe characteristic of the president. And I think humanizing him at times does definitely help. I want him to be in rallies, go to all sorts of different areas, rural areas, areas, out west areas, in the south, in the east. That's, I think, something he can definitely do to perhaps spread his campaign. And also, we should definitely remind people who exactly Donald Trump is. He tried overturning an election. He's, has however many indictments at this case, I can barely keep count. And I think we need to draw that contrast a little. And again, we do need to see legislation at some point. We also have a government we need to fund until the end of the year as well. So there are definitely, even though we might expect less legislation, there is still legislation that we need to get done for the good of both the president and America.
Absolutely.
Right. I mean, we're definitely still expecting Biden to do his job as president. And I think something that a lot of people respect about Biden and appreciate about him is the jobs he's been creating. So still focusing on that. I think that, like Liz and I have been saying, like the importance of Kamala Harris cannot be ignored. She, not to sound grim, but she very well might be the next president. So I think that we need to be bringing her in more, because I think many are saying, like, where is Kamala? I haven't been hearing about her. She has just sort of been pushed to the side. But yeah, I think Biden needs to be going to these places and going to, even if it's not as much of a swing state, he needs to be going everywhere and showing that he can represent all Americans and that he can competently become president again and win re-election, because the alternative, we might just get a dictator for just one day, but maybe more than one day, so maybe not worth the risk.
No, but thank you guys for your last little insight thoughts. And that'll be all that we have time for here today. Liz, Jared, and Vivien, I want to thank you all for being our panelists and sharing your very insightful perspectives. Now let's take it back to Maria's and Maria for the fact check.
We had a nice, clean show today. All facts and statistics were checked, and they are all correct.
Well, that's all for this episode of Capital Crossfire.
Be sure to check us out online at www.gw-tv.com and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at GW Capital Crossfire.
From all of us here at GW TV, I'm Maris.
And I'm Maria.
Thanks for getting caught in the crossfire with us.
We'll see you back here next time.